Hello and welcome to the Fuel, Run, Recover podcast, helping everyday runners fuel better, run smarter, and recover faster so you can reach your full performance potential. I'm your host, Stephanie Natchek, dietitian, fitness coach, and a fellow runner too. As the owner of Stephanie Natchek Performance Nutrition, I've spent the last 10 years helping runners learn to fuel their bodies, level up their running performance, and establish healthier relationships with food and exercise. If you're ready to reconnect with your love of running, then let's get started on today's episode. All right. So, hello and welcome to today's episode, which is part one of a 3-part series that we are going to be doing all about nutrition mistakes that runners make. So, who knows, in the future, we might be adding on and have more than 3 parts here, but I wanted to do the kind of top three nutrition mistakes that I see runners making on a regular basis. So this is going to be a 3-part series with today being, of course, part 1. So I really hope that you enjoy this series, just, breaking down some of these longer, bigger topics into some shorter episodes that maybe you can enjoy on a shorter workout. You don't need quite as much time to get through these episodes. So without further ado, we'll dive into this week's big nutrition mistake. This might be the kind of number 1 nutrition mistake that runners make, or it's certainly at the very least is in the top 3. And that is not eating enough to fuel your training demands. So this big mistake is really about just not taking in enough calories or enough energy to support the demands of your training. And there's a couple different reasons why runners do this, or why a runner might do this, why you might find yourself doing this. And I want to talk about a few different scenarios. The first one, though, is that we have this drive for weight loss. So a lot of runners are maybe taking up the sport of running or become runners because they want to lose weight, or at least see it as a really kind of good way or maybe easy way to maintain a lower weight. And we're sort of sold this concept that weight loss is really, really simple. All we need to do is eat less and move more. And while it is true that a calorie deficit, meaning we eat fewer calories than we burn, is required for weight loss and, of course, loss of body fat, but the problem comes into play when we're trying to maintain a calorie deficit that is actually too large. So a calorie deficit that is much bigger than what's kind of ideal to see those changes in weight or changes in body composition. And I know this sounds like, wait, what? How can that be the case, right? Wouldn't a bigger calorie deficit, a larger calorie deficit, just accelerate or just, get me the result, get me the weight loss or the fat loss result that I'm looking for faster? And yeah, like mathematically speaking, especially if you use some of those tracking apps where they kind of predict weight loss and sort of give you numbers and time frames of how much weight you'll lose over X amount of time if you eat this many calories and that sort of thing. A big problem with those is that they're not accounting for the fact that we as human beings are not just easy mathematical equations. There's a lot of fluidity and flexibility than things that happen with hormone levels, with appetite, with our metabolic rate, all of these things, where it's not always just as easy as kind of input calories, output numbers. Not to mention the fact that our tools for tracking this information, whether it be how many calories you eat or how many calories you burn, is pretty rudimentary, even though we do have a lot of like tools and apps and programs and things that seem to make it very simple and very easy. In reality, the numbers can be not that accurate. There's a pretty wide range of variability in terms of some of those numbers. So all issues with calorie tracking and, the ins and outs of that aside, as I mentioned, a calorie deficit is needed for weight loss or body fat loss. But it's when we have a calorie deficit that is too large that we start to see a problem. And what we are then encountering is a situation called low energy availability. And so energy availability is defined as the dietary energy left over for optimum function of body systems after accounting for the energy expended from exercise. So it's basically after we account for the calories that we burn through our physical activity, through our exercise, what is left over to actually keep the lights on, run the body systems. And that's everything from hormone function, all of the things that kind of encompass our metabolism, right? All of the different things that are happening that we kind of encompass when we talk about metabolism, all of those different body processes and body functions, our digestion, our brain function, our sleep, and that's everything we talk about brain function, concentration, mood, memory, mental performance, like everything. And of course, also our recovery from exercise is going to be part of that as well. So when we have a situation where there aren't enough calories being consumed, not enough calories coming in to support both the exercise that we're doing and also all of those background metabolic processes, all of those basic body systems and functions, not enough calories for exercise and also keeping the lights on, as it were, we end up in a situation that we call low energy availability. And there's kind of a spectrum of low energy availability in terms of, how severe, how much of an issue it is. There's a newer term that's come out more recently in the research that what we call problematic low energy availability. And so problematic low energy availability is basically what happens when we start to see reductions in performance, issues with different body functions and systems as a result of not consuming enough fuel for our training demands, right? Not enough fuel for both our training demands and our background basic metabolic functions. And this really impacts every body system. But, the things that are going to be really apparent or kind of noticeable to runners will be everything from like low mental energy, just not feeling good during the day. We might find that our memory, our mood, our concentration, sleep can definitely be impacted. We can feel tired all the time, but have trouble going to sleep and staying asleep. We can notice a lot of gastrointestinal symptoms. So we can find that our digestion is all out of whack. A lot of people will struggle with gas, bloating, constipation, which of course can make us, maybe sometimes even reduce our food intake further because we are struggling with these symptoms after we eat. We can see a loss of muscle mass, or what we call lean body mass. So we can have a hard time building and maintaining muscle. We can see muscle loss over time if we're tracking things like body composition. What's really interesting is we can also see a reduction in our ability to lose body fat, or difficulty with losing body fat. And as well, of course, an overall reduction in our metabolic rate, or, the amount of energy that we're burning on a daily basis. And alterations in hormone function, which can impact everything from, our hunger, our appetite signals, and those types of body processes, all the way over to, of course, our reproductive hormone function, where athletes might see a change in things like the frequency of their menstrual cycle, or changes in their menstrual cycle, either, just less often, and or losing our menstrual cycle altogether. We, of course, also can experience more frequent illnesses and injuries because of the reduction in our ability to recover from our workouts, more likely to get into that overtraining type of zone, more likely to experience overuse injuries. Also, maybe acute injuries as well can be an issue when we're in this problematic low energy availability state. And because the immune system also requires energy, just like every other body system, our immune system also needs calories in order to produce immune system cells. In order to function optimally and properly, we need nutrients to do that, not just calories, but also some vitamins and minerals are a part of those processes. So we can find ourselves getting sick and also injured more often. If all of this isn't enough, then of course it can all kind of add up to us really seeing a reduction in our physical performance. Reduced strength, reduced speed, reduced endurance, maybe as an aside to all of these things that we're experiencing, but also because of them too. So we aren't going to feel our best, and we also certainly are not going to perform our best. And at a certain point, this low energy availability is really going to start to impact our ability to continue running either at the volume that we are or at the capacity or intensity that we are. And it's going to make everything feel and seem that much more difficult. And so if you're in this state because you are pursuing weight loss or pursuing body fat loss, what's really frustrating is you can be eating very, very little, doing a tremendous amount of training, but still not be seeing the results that you want to, especially when it comes to actually losing and reducing body fat percentage. We can see a worsening of body composition because of that loss of lean mass versus, seeing the reduction in body fat percentage that we are hoping to or that we want to. So really what we want to do as runners is we want to stay out of this problematic low energy availability state. We do not want to be here. This is not a good place to be in. And even if we are seeing weight loss or we are maybe maintaining a lower weight or a lower body fat percentage with low energy availability, if the trade-off is potentially all of these other symptoms, all of these other issues, then it really is down the road. At some point, it's going to impact our ability to run. It's going to impact our health. It's going to impact maybe even our long-term health, long-term injury risk, and really get in the way of optimal health and optimal performance. The other issue with this scenario is not even just, a situation where someone's maybe maintaining a very low calorie intake and just not eating enough all across the board. Just, they're in this problematic low energy availability state and they're consistently underfueling all the time. But what also happens and what I see really, really frequently with runners is actually that this large calorie deficit, like this significant calorie deficit, is really hard to maintain. And again, because of these fluctuations we can experience with our appetite and our hunger and fullness signals, we can have some days that we eat very, very little. And then some days that we are so hungry, we just cannot seem to get enough to eat. So our actual calorie intake day to day can be all over the map. Some days are really low and then some days are really high. And we're just up and down and up and down. Our brain, our body does not know what is going on. We can have days that we're doubling our calorie intake from other days. And that's a really difficult place to be in, both like physiologically as well as psychologically. That can really weigh on us and, of course, not contribute to better body function, better performance, and a healthy relationship with food and exercise. What can also be happening, and this does happen occasionally as well, is maybe we are really trying to be focused on this. Maybe we are really trying to look at our energy intake and our calorie intake, but we're not being very consistent or very detailed with our food tracking. So we may not be in the deficit that we think we are. And again, there is a lot of variability with calories, like calorie tracking and food labels and stuff like that. And of course, knowing how many calories we burn on the flip side of that. So even if we are trying to be as detailed as possible, we always have to be okay with there being some variability there with our tracking. So all that to say, the biggest mistake that I see runners making so often is really just not eating enough to fuel our training demands, either on a consistent basis, so not eating enough all the time. We're just always in this state of low energy availability, or our calorie intake is just all over the map. So some days are really low, some days are really high. We just don't have any consistency with our intake, with our eating, and we are not matching our food intake to the demands of our training. We're not thinking about how much fuel we need based on what we're doing for activity that day, how much exercise we're doing, or we're just kind of all over the map, and our eating habits are very sporadic. So what should we do instead? How do we fix this problem? Well, of course, I would definitely recommend if you think that, you're listening to this and a lot of this is resonating with you, maybe you're noticing a lot of the symptoms that I just described, you're seeing changes in your menstrual cycle, you are having a really hard time getting stronger, getting faster, building your endurance, you're sick or injured all the time, you've been, trying to eat less and move more, but you're just not getting anywhere, your digestion is a mess, your sleep is a mess. If you're listening to this list of symptoms, you're like, oh yeah, I'm checking a lot of these boxes. A lot of these things are really resonating with me. Then I would definitely recommend reaching out to someone and working with someone on your nutrition. And really connecting with a dietitian who specializes in nutrition for runners, getting some good quality, reliable information about how to eat to fuel your training, how to make sure that you're matching your intake with your training demands. And what this looks like is looking at the volume of training that you're doing and aiming to eat fairly close to your actual needs. So trying to be within a very small window of eating very similar to what your actual needs are day to day. And we have to take a really close look at our training demands and really take a close look at what we're doing with our volume of exercise. Not to be like judgy or to be hard on ourselves about what we're doing, but just being realistic. And I say that because sometimes, especially if we are dealing with a lot of injuries or we have a lot of other life obligations that keep us really busy, if we just have a lot going on, then sometimes what we planned to do for exercise or what we want to be doing for exercise or training volume may not be a reflection of what we actually are able to fit in. And so we want to just realistically look at what we're doing week to week for our training, not what we want to be doing or think we should be doing, and then eat in a way that supports that volume of training and make sure that we're matching up how much fuel we're getting to our actual training needs. So we want to get out of the eat less, move more mindset, get out of this idea that we need to eat the smallest amount of food possible while doing as much training as we can possibly fit in. Make sure that if we are trying to be in a calorie deficit for fat loss, it is actually a very small calorie deficit, but that we are consistent with that deficit over time to see a change in body composition. It's not a big deficit. We're talking about like 10, maybe 20%, and actually just being consistent with that over time. Do we need to track calories in order to do that? Not necessarily. We don't have to be, a slave to the apps and those programs and be, just so dedicated to tracking and putting everything into a program, everything into an app. That is not usually required to see success with this, especially if we're talking about long-term consistency. It's so much work to track our calories and the information is not that detailed anyway. So it should be sort of a short-term thing regardless. But it is possible to be consistent with our eating, to match our fuel intake to our training demands, and ultimately get where we want to be with our changes in body composition. So that's number one. The first reason why runners may not be eating enough to fuel their training demands would be this sort of idea that we're trying to change body composition, optimize body composition, lose weight, and we're in that eat less, move more mindset. But the second reason that people are going to be underfueling and in this state of low energy availability is because they are just truly unaware of how much fuel they need. And I meet a lot of runners who this is where they find themselves. It's not that they're like trying to lose weight or change their body composition or diet or do anything like that. They just really don't know how much they actually need to support the volume of training that they're doing. And a lot of this does kind of come back and go back to diet culture, in that diet culture has kind of taught us that like 1,200 calories a day is a good amount of food for an adult person, for women especially. And for men, I feel like I have a lot of male clients who, around 1,500, maybe 1,800 calories a day is sort of where they might find themselves. And it's amazing that, we just kind of have it in our minds that these are appropriate numbers. These are good amounts of food for us as runners. And a lot of people kind of compare their eating to that number and think, oh my gosh, I'm eating so much because it's more than maybe the 1,200 or 1,500 calories that we've been kind of taught is an adequate amount. The reality, though, is that a lot of runners are going to need at least double that amount. If you are training for a race, if you are exercising, running, strength training, cross training most days of the week, if you are doing runs that are longer than an hour multiple times a week, if you're getting ready for a half marathon, a marathon, an ultra marathon, a triathlon, if you are doing, these high volumes of training and you're doing a lot of activity, you are going to need to be fueling with at least double that amount of calories. It sounds nuts, but it's true. 1,200 calories is less than most people's resting metabolic rate, or that is lower than most people's resting metabolism. That is not even enough to keep the lights on if we're talking and going back to low energy availability. That 1,200 calories a day is not even enough to keep the lights on in our bodies, never mind the amount that we need to fuel for all of the activity that we're doing. So whether we are aware of, trying to eat less and move more, or we just don't know how much fuel we actually need, ultimately we can both scenarios, a runner can wind up back in the situation of having problematic low energy availability. Whether it's intentional or not, really the main impact there will be if someone's relationship with food and exercise is really being affected, in which case people who are intentionally trying to eat less, intentionally trying to lose weight, and not having success and feeling really frustrated, then certainly that can lead to some alterations and some negative impacts on our relationship with food and exercise. But a lot of times, if people just aren't really aware and aren't intentionally trying to eat a very small amount, they might not have a negative relationship with food and exercise. Like they might feel like they're eating plenty and doing fine in that regard. It's just some of these symptoms, some of these issues can start to creep up and can start to become a problem. So that is the end of today's episode, all about part one of the top nutrition mistakes that I see runners making on a regular basis. The first one that we've discussed today being not eating enough to fuel your training. How we fix this problem, it's not necessarily that we need to be tracking our calories and being really detailed about that, even though you certainly can and that is an option. But I would recommend, if you're going to do that, to be working with a professional in order to make sure that the numbers that you're aiming for are appropriate and realistic for your training volumes. The apps are not going to do that automatically for you, no matter what we think. And of course, we want to ensure that we're eating at least 3 meals a day and including some snacks, especially in that pre and post workout time frame. So at the very least, if you're just kind of getting started on this journey and you're like, I don't even know where to start, how do I do this, what do I do? Looking at your eating frequency, make sure that you have 3 meals a day and you're including pre and post workout nutrition. Those might be additional snacks before and after you train. At the very least, that framework of meal timing will start to set you up for success. And as I mentioned before, I really strongly encourage you, if this message here in this podcast is resonating with you, this sounds like you, and you're kind of seeing a lot of yourself reflected in that list of symptoms that I mentioned. If you're seeing that and it's really kind of hitting home, then working with someone on your nutrition is so important if you want to have a really happy, healthy, long running career. I would be thrilled if you decided that you wanted to work with me, but at the very least, I want you to reach out and work with a registered dietitian who specializes in running, working with endurance athletes, who can really help to create a plan that is going to be appropriate and adequate for you. I work with clients one-on-one, but of course, I also have some fantastic online courses and programs, the Fuel, Train, Recover online course, and of course, my signature online program, the Fuel, Train, Recover Club. Both of these options cover nutrition, everything you need to know about eating as a runner, how to get out of the eat less, move more mindset, learning more about the damage that eating less and moving more does in our bodies, figuring out how much you really need to eat in a day based on your training demands, how to figure out what that fuel looks like, what to eat before and after you run, where to get protein, where to get the right types of carbohydrates. So much information about how to eat properly, how to fuel your body properly as a runner. And of course, so much more, because we also talk about training, we also talk about recovery. You can find more details about working with me either in a one-on-one capacity or joining the Fuel, Train, Recover Club at the links in the show notes. And I would love to have you join us or join me working with me one-on-one. It would be so great to help even more runners achieve their goals. So that is it for today's episode. I hope that you enjoyed it, and we will see you back next week for part 2 of the top nutrition mistakes runners make. We will be continuing our 3-part series, and I can't wait for next week when we talk about what's coming up next, which is around meal timing. That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining me, and we will see you next week. Bye for now. The information on this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not to be used or relied upon for the diagnosis or treatment of any health condition. This information does not create a client-practitioner relationship and should not be used as a substitute for professional medical advice.